the two of you are known for composing projects that are more skewed for the horror genre, like Midnight Mass and Five Nights at Freddy's. So, what was your approach on taking on X-Men 97, which is a lot more commercial and obviously has a dedicated fan base behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of started off doing lots of drama and action and different genres, but what took off first in our careers was horror, and so we kind of became more known for those pieces. But we've always done other styles and genres, and I think for X-Men, we were just such huge fans. As you know, I remember being a kid watching it, and I was so excited. And so I think just having that incredible love for the property and really, just really it's inspiring to come up with ideas and melodies and riffs. And so it was really sort of a natural kind of approach from us going from what we've done to jumping into X-Men. And everybody on the team was just such a down at heart, just like a super nerd, which is I feel like you really need to love, especially something like this, an IP like this, to really give the fans what they need and deserve.
Yeah, there's a lot of like what Taylor's saying. Like, first, like to go back to your question, it really allowed us to sort of open up the arsenal. Oftentimes on a project, we're kind of restricted once we get into a project. Not restricted, but like it comes down to like a sound. And for X-Men, we really wanted the sound we wanted to encapsulate everything musically as much as we could. And it's rare that you get to do that. Most of the time you need to pull way back and just sort of, dodge dialogue and that's fun and the trick of it. And in this case, like, it's just like as much as in some cases, not the entire time, but in a lot of cases, like how can we have everything happening at the same time and still not make it sound muddy. So it's a lot of fun to incorporate all of those things.
Yeah. Now, okay, got to be honest. Did you feel any type of trepidation saying yes to X-Men 97?
Oh, yes. So much. Yeah. To be honest, when you go after a project like this, Taylor and I have been doing this long enough to sort of temper our expectations. In this case, we had to, like, we would just tell each other, like, let's do our best, because we had to do demos for this project. And in that case, you just do your best and you hope for the best, but you try not to get too excited about anything ever until the time is right. And when we found out, I won't speak for Taylor, but I know I was, on most projects you're excited about, you're terrified at first because you don't want to do the wrong thing. Like, I remember when Mike Flanagan told us that we were going to be doing Dr. Sleep. It's like, you're so excited, but you're also like, we're supposed to be doing the sequel to The Shining. Like, it's terrifying. But I think that those are the things in life that help you better yourself, because if left to my own devices, we would just, without wanting to become lazy, you become lazy because you want to just, oh, this is the easier way to do things. Oh, this is the easier way. And in taking on projects like this, the fear of it really drives you to push yourself. So I am super grateful for projects like this, specifically this project, because it was terrifying to get this project in a very healthy way, I think. What do you think, Taylor?
Yeah, I think just as David Bowie says, you want to go out into the water just where your toes can barely touch the ground. And that's just about where you want to be. And I think, as an artist, you always want to, keep expanding, keep growing and trying, because if you're just doing the same thing, it becomes boring. And it was very exciting. And even though we knew we've done stuff like this before, commercially, we weren't known for this. So it was very exciting.
Now, Andy, you mentioned that the two of you made demos to submit for this. What kind of sounds were you pulling from in these demos for X-Men 97?
I think we went a little more retro, because for the show, we brought out a lot of the late 80s, early 90s kind of synthesizers. And I think for the demos, they were a little more retro, but then it had like giant orchestra. And I think that's kind of what we submitted on. And then we toned down some of that sound and in certain places, but it landed in a couple scenes. Like one of the demos we did ended up becoming a piece that's used throughout the series. So it's that, you know, that's when, you know, there's like a good fit, a good marriage to that. But yeah, it went really well.
Yeah, that's awesome. More on those musical cues. I gotta say that club scene in the very first episode, it sounded like it was pulled straight out of the late 90s. So talk to me about your process about finding those like specific retro sounds that was able to, really land people back in the 90s here.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. We were in the spotting session, and Bo just turned to us and said, like, cool, you guys want to do some 90s dance tracks here? And she said, yes, let's go. And we kind of just dove in. Like, everything in there is like, even Taylor and I are singing on there. And there's, yeah, I mean, it's the thing that you play around with in the studio, but rarely get to use, you know? So in this case, we got to use it. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of experimentation on that, but then a lot of it just went back to like when Taylor and I were, you know, in that zone early on in not even in our careers at this point, just doing music for fun. You're tinkering with all of those sounds and playing with those sounds. So it was just like, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
When I first moved to LA, it wasn't the 90s, but it was in the 2000s. I was DJing for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. So I knew, I mean, to me, it was old school. The 90s was like old school music, but it was, I would try to sneak it into sort of the vinyl play. And so Andy and I are both very familiar with that sound and that world. So it was just like, it was fun.
I mean, it's clear that there is like, we're seeing a resurgence of the 90s and like the early 2000s culture cycle its way back into popularity. And I feel like X-Men 97 is really riding this like cultural wave. So from your perspective, like, what do you think it is about like the 90s and even like 90s music that is so appealing to people today? Why do you think it's made a comeback?
I think there's this, well, for the people who lived in the 90s, there's this nostalgic feeling, obviously, when you hear those songs, you see those clothes, those movies, especially for me, more so in the late 80s, because I think I was like, I was 13 in like the 90s or something like that, like 93 or something, 94. But I think people just, the generation that lived in that, they had a lot of moments that they didn't know were nostalgic because they were living in them. You know what I mean? But I think looking back on it, it's like, you went on your first date, you went to see this movie, back then, like you'd buy a CD or a vinyl and like, you might have bought it for a single, but you end up listening to the whole album, and then you fall in love with it. And like, there's this sort of magic that happens. And I think for the generation that didn't live in the 90s, I think they look at it kind of the way we looked at it in the 80s when we were 90s kids, as like, oh, there's this nostalgic feelings and those things. And so I think it brings those sentiments to, at least to me. And I think when it comes to shows and movies and things, I mean, just look at the comment section, even in X-Men, everyone's like, man, this gives me goosebumps when I used to Saturday morning have cereal in my pajamas. And like, people are sort of looking back at that time, which means obviously there were good memories. Yeah.
And I think, I don't know the exact time this happened, but I feel like it was around the mid 90s that, you could start they were figuring out how to download music. I wasn't quite hip to it that early on, but I know a friend of mine was like into downloading music somehow from the internet that was young in the 90s too. Yeah. Yeah. And it, like now it's so easy. If you want to hear a song, like, what's that song? Like Shazam, like boom, instantly gratified to hear what you just were excited about. And, in the 90s, the 80s, 70s, prior to that, you'd have to find that song, and sometimes you would be unsuccessful. And I think that process of hunting down music, finding music, having live music, films, having to, I mean, you could start renting VHS tapes at a certain point, but it was still not, going to the theater was a big deal. Things being on TV, you'd have to record it. So I think there's like a big, like, I think the 90s was kind of like the last moment before things became instantaneous. I mean, that's not exactly correct, but you know what I mean. Like, I feel like somewhere in there is where we transition to, like, it's easier to get a hold of music and films and TV shows. And I think there's that the process of getting those things made you want it more. I don't know. That I could be completely off base there.
No, I think you're tapping into something there. I am currently obsessed with growing my vinyl collection, and it's been really cool for me to like rediscover music from the 80s and the 90s that I've really loved, and be able to like preserve it in vinyl and be able to experience the album as it like came out initially. So I think there is a magic in that.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. It's really fun. We had to test some vinyl that we have coming out in about a month. And so this weekend we had to just, like, for several hours, just listen to vinyl. And it's just so peaceful. I haven't listened to vinyl for that long of a time in a while. Usually it's like I'll throw on one side and then, listen to it and I'm off to something else. This was like hours of just, and it's very peaceful and pleasant. It's nice.
That's how I like to kick off my weekend, is picking a vinyl. And that is like the peaceful mode I'm going into my weekend.
Oh yeah. That's good. Love that.
Yeah. Now, as far as like coming up with your sound and stuff, were there any musicians from the 90s that you were inspired by to kind of like mix into the score for X-Men 97?
That's a great question. I don't think on my end. Taylor, you go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think so much musicians. I think more artists and albums definitely really sort of landed. I know that in certain episodes, certain artists inspired things, like Michael Jackson's Thriller inspired episode 3. There was just different things. There was a Prodigy inspired some stuff a little bit, and Radiohead, what's OK Computer 97 that came out, that inspired an episode very much, because it's sort of like it's during that era, it definitely influenced music, even compositions in a lot of ways, because a lot of composers were getting the new drum machines, getting new synthesizers. And it's the same synths and drum machines that the bands are using. So Depeche Mode you're going to hear Depeche Mode drum machine on, like, Rain Man or something. You know what I mean? Like it all kind of weaves together. So I think more so artists, I'd probably say. Doesn't that seem right to you, Andy?
Yeah. That seems right. I know, like, I was deep diving. Taylor's kind of the mad scientist, so I was deep diving more. I've only recently started acquiring a hefty amount of synths in the last few years. So I was kind of deep diving on finding some interesting sounds and synthesizers, and came across a guy who was gifted a vault of floppy drives that used to go into synthesizers that that Genesis used. And that spawned a whole deep dive, 2.5 days of just finding sounds from old synths, based on what that was. So that was a lot of fun. It didn't actually end up yielding anything that I could use in the show, but I feel like it all connects and works into a way that inspires.
Yeah. Oh, that is so cool. Oh my gosh. So I want to shift gears over. Obviously, we need to talk about the iconic theme music. And for me, musically, it sounds nearly the same as the original theme song from X-Men, the animated series. Can you share the subtle differences that you made to the theme?
Yeah, it's I mean, that theme is perfect as it, I mean, it's perfect. So it's like when we sort of went to tackle that, we kept that in mind. Like we don't want to mess, like, it's written, everyone loves it. Like there's no need to like mess with the song. Ron wrote, like, in my eyes, like a perfect piece of music, I think. So we really just came into it by updating some of the production sounds. I mean, as time goes by, production quality can increase. I mean, I don't want to say it can increase. Like there's just, yeah, the technology just gets better. That doesn't mean it's better just because it's newer. It's just the sounds are different. So we tried to we use some very old synthesizers. We use like plugins that are like computer synthesizers. And then we had access to an orchestra and a choir. So we kind of used everything to our disposal. We had Nili Brosh play the lead guitar in it. She just brought like a quality to it that's real cool and fun. And all the musicians that we used in Vienna also brought like a fun quality to it. There's something about being in a room with musicians who are experts at what they do and having them just really dial into what's happening. So we really just tried to follow the blueprint of what was there and update it and keep it in the same vein of being fun and not changing too much, if anything at all.
And I think for some experiments, we did do more modernized version of it and some variations of it. And I think, what kind of the conclusion is that some of the sounds that are used that people may say it sounds like, oh, that sounds 90s or that has a 90s sound. I think if you change that, it just immediately changes the way when you turn on the show, it doesn't really transport you back to the 90s. It makes you feel like you're more in today. And we specifically wanted the intro to not feel like that. So that's kind of why we tiptoed in details on that part.
Yeah. And Taylor, you reminded me, I kind of blacked out on this. Like we did we did like 5, 6 or 7 versions of the main title, right? That we produced all of them differently. Yeah. Like here's a super like modern version of it. Here's like an all synth version of it. Here's like a quiet version of it.
The quiet version that was great too.
Yeah. They all have a thing. But I think that, and that's where it's really helpful to have the team that was involved, because really Taylor and I can do what we do, but then to have we're so grateful to have the team that we had on this, because, we'd play stuff for them and they instantly would say like, oh, this is great, but do this, or can we do this? Or this is perfect. Or, this, it was just really collaborative, which was really great. So they really helped us sort of dial this in.
Okay, so we're still in the first half of this first season, so obviously no spoilers. But are there scenes that you've scored that you're excited for fans to watch? And if so, what can you hint about them?
There are definitely scenes that I'm excited for fans to watch. Those specific scenes, I can't get into the details specifically because there's so much is happening, so much changes. But what I loved about the original when I was a kid is how much would happen in 30 minutes, how much would change. And I feel like the shock and awe, what happens in this season and where it goes also gives that same feeling of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this just happened. Oh my gosh. And so there are key moments that, especially for me in episode 5 and 9, that I was just like, whoa. And my mind was just blown. And musically, they were very, very fun to write too, because, we can really dive into actions and emotions and it's just the writing on the show is so good. And with the way that you don't expect certain characters to do something, and then all of a sudden they do it. A lot of times, like life, they expand and they change. And so it was really fun. But I definitely wish I could say what happens, because there's one character that does something that's just so much. Yeah, it'd be very fun to talk about that.
Yeah. And I think that episode 1, 2, and 3 are out now. I mean, the whole end of episode 2 was really fun to score, but that whole Magneto speech, because it's
Mhm.
such a powerful speech. Like everything that he's saying when he's, up above Earth is very it lands heavy for every single person. And that was a lot of fun to sort of be a part of that. And I think, yeah, like Taylor said, I wish we could say more about things to come, but actually something he said was so spot on. Like every time we would watch a new episode, it would be a holy cow moment. Like what, like every episode just keeps sort of stepping up, which is really fun. But, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
All right. That's fair enough, but I do want to know, as you've been working on this, do you have a favorite X-Men to score scenes for? Do you have a new favorite character now that you have been a part of this?
Yeah, for me, my favorite character is probably Magneto and then Storm. Um, and interestingly enough, when we started the show, we both kind of had preconceived ideas of who our favorite characters were based off the original series, the comic books, movies, and just all kinds of things. And I think, and I won't speak for Andy, but when we started, all of a sudden our characters were changing, like who we liked, who we kind of fell in love with. And so for me, Magneto really just sort of where he comes from in terms of his family, and then dying and just like and sort of just the hardships he's had and his brothership with Xavier and that sort of connection. And then now, where he is and what he's doing, with the X-Men. I just think it's just very captivating, that character and how strong and powerful he is. And also Storm. I mean, Storm's amazing. So I think those characters for me, I didn't start out with those characters, but that's kind of where I landed.
Yeah, and I similarly, I kind of started with Magneto as just that was my character, but I came throughout the season, I came to really enjoy, still sounds so boring, but Beast, just because of the sort of the calm and pragmatic sense that he brings to situations. And maybe that's just a reflection of more of what I need in my own life, but I really appreciate like how he like tackles things. So that's a strange one. Yeah. Also, he's blue, and I love the color blue. So I'm so boring, but there it is.
I don't think there's anything boring about the steady presence of Beast. Okay. Like more love for Beast. I'm here for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have a favorite character at this moment?
So obviously, I really love Storm. I think seeing her again has just been so awesome. And I hated the end because or actually the end of episode 3, seeing her again, it's like, yes, let's bring her back into the fold. I love Storm. But also, I really love Scott Summers. He is really like come back to reminding people of like, he's not just this milk toast guy. There's so much going on with him as Cyclops, and I love his relationship with Jean Grey. And so seeing him back again and really struggling with like his place with the X-Men right now has just been really fascinating for me.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, that's
Great
awesome.
answer. That was a great answer.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't wait to see the rest of the season and see how that just like evolves and changes because, 1 week it could be Scott and then the next week it could be Jean Grey again, or it could be Wolverine or another new character that comes around.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
So I'm almost wrapped up for time, but I do have one more question for y'all because you are frequent collaborators with Mike Flanagan and Collider. We love Mike Flanagan, like with the fall of the House of Usher and coming up soon, The Life of Chuck. I'd love to know, like, if you can tease anything about what you're working on for Life of Chuck. And since you've worked with Mike Flanagan before, like, has your process changed from project to project with him, or have you seen it be a bit more consistent? You know what you're getting yourself into.
A lot of great questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to answer in reverse order, the process kind of it's a similar process, but it's different every time. Is that right, Taylor? Just in that we don't want to, we don't want to bore Mike. We want to keep it different, but we know the things that we need to do, and in doing that, it's a lot of exploration, especially early on. We have to sort of come to the table with some interesting ideas, and sometimes they're horrible, and sometimes they land just right. So, and Life of Chuck was no exception. It's very different from anything we've done for Mike and Trevor, isn't it, Taylor? Is that right to say?
I mean, first of all, if it's a drama, yeah, there's not a horror. Yeah, I mean, me personally, the first screening we had of it, and I watched it. I was just a wreck after watching it. It was so emotional. He has that quality about his writing, Mike does, and the way he directs and the capturing these characters he's created. But that particular film, just, yeah, it's definitely a Kleenex situation.
Yeah, it's a good film, and we're actually done with it. We finished it. We wrapped it like 2 weeks ago. So, yeah.
So, I'm not sure when it's being released just yet, but it's a real treat. Yeah, it's a very, very special film, very special project, and the acting is superb, and Mike and Trevor and everyone else, and it's a definitely, don't want to miss it.
I will have my tissues packed and ready. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. I'm so excited to see the rest of the series and hear more of your music come through, especially for episode 5 and 9, which you've been teasing. It sounds like it's going to be great.
Yeah.
We're excited. Yeah. And thanks for chatting with us today. We really appreciate it, Meredith.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.